Hey guys, tonight we drift into the icy embrace of the 19th century Arctic seas, where towering sheets of ice loom on the horizon, and a biting wind nips at your cheeks. You stand on the creaking wooden deck of a British exploration vessel, peering over the railing as the cold salt spray prickles your skin. Already, you catch whispers of a surprising cargo below deck, 500 pounds of jam. The wind howls like a homesick ghost, and you can't help but imagine what unexpected role these jars of sweet preserves will play in your survival. If, of course, you manage to survive at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who's tuning in to these frosty tales from all corners of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The plank under your boots vibrates with each churn of the ship's engine, and a sharp chill settles in your lungs whenever you inhale. Seagulls wheel overhead for a while, but before long, the last signs of the familiar world fade behind you, and you're left with the stark sense that you have stepped into another realm. One of swirling snow, endless winter, and quiet determination. There's an odd sense of excitement mingled with dread as you fully commit to the journey. Nobody boards a vessel heading for the Arctic and expects to lounge around in a comfy deck chair, sipping lemonade. No, this is a pursuit of glory, knowledge, and maybe a touch of vanity. The leaders of these expeditions swear they'll find a navigable Northwest Passage, that elusive route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, thus revolutionizing global trade. It's one of those quests that's half science, half stubbornness, and 100% freezing. You bundle up in layers of wool, peer into the distance, and wonder who first said, "Sure, let's haul half a ton of jam north." And yet, that's exactly what's happened. Tucked away below deck are massive crates lined with jars of sticky, sugary fruit preserves. More than a few of your fellow travelers joke that the real expedition is to see who can finish their jars first. A questionable challenge for your teeth, but maybe worth it. In these conditions, sweets become a rare form of comfort, a tangible reminder of home's warmth. One mainstream historical fact that might surprise you: in the 19th century, British naval vessels commonly carried staggering quantities of preserved foods, jam being just one example. Hardtack biscuits, salted meat, and gallons of rum also lined the cramped holds. But for these Arctic voyagers, there's something about jam that stands out. It's not just a nice to have. It's part of the cunning plan to keep morale and energy as high as humanly possible in a realm where the sun sometimes abandons you for months. As for a quirky tidbit, rumor has it that some Arctic explorers tried mixing jam with heated liquor, believing it would stay liquid in sub-zero temperatures. Whether this was a stroke of brilliance or just a sign of desperation is debatable. The jam might have improved the flavor, but the real benefit was that the sugar didn't freeze quite as quickly as water, providing a quick sugar rush when all else seemed to congeal in the cold. You can almost imagine two frostbitten explorers huddling over a pot, dropping in spoonfuls of raspberry preserves and going, "Well, at least it's not chunked ice." Moving around on deck is a feat in itself. You grip a rope, feeling its coarse hemp dig into your palms, and carefully shuffle to avoid slipping on the slick boards. Despite the constant threat of losing toes to frostbite, there's an undercurrent of excitement among the crew. The goal is simple yet audacious: push farther north, glean intelligence on waterways choked with ice floes, and, if luck allows, make scientific observations that will dazzle the folks back home. Of course, there's also a dash of national pride fueling these expeditions. Britain wants to be the first to map every last inch of the Arctic labyrinth. Flags are pressed, crests polished. Your superiors can already taste the accolades. If you squint, you might spot your commander pacing the deck, his breath forming little clouds in the air. He's fiddling with a spyglass, scanning for any sign of open water. It's too soon to do anything but sail forward, trusting that the ocean's secrets will reveal themselves. And then there's the jam. Believe it or not, some historians still argue whether jam truly helps stave off diseases like scurvy in these punishing conditions, or if it was more for morale than medicine. Sure, vitamin C was better sourced from citrus or fresh produce, both of which are hard to find in a polar wasteland. But sugar-laden fruit preserves definitely offered quick bursts of energy and at least a psychological lift. Once the gloom of polar night sets in, sweet comforts can mean the difference between determined grit and utter despair. It's funny how much of your day revolves around this sugary staple. You might have jam with your dry biscuits for breakfast, jam spread onto whatever questionable ration you have for lunch, and jam stirred into hot tea at dinner to mask the faint aftertaste of salted water. It's jam here, jam there, jam everywhere. Talk about a sweet tooth. If you thought your dentist bill at home was high, try explaining a half-year jam binge in the Arctic. A second joke: imagine being the guy who has to lug the crates of jam onto the ship. You overhear him muttering, "If I never see another jar again, it'll be too soon. I'll dream about jam jars chasing me in my sleep." The rest of the crew laughs because, well, you all feel it. This is a ridiculous scenario, yet it's also serious, because these crates might be the difference between morale and misery during the endless nights to come. While you stand by the railing, you notice ice starting to form at the edges of the water. The temperature plunges, the seas grow more erratic, and the sky takes on that subdued, silver hue that only comes when the sun is low on the horizon for hours on end. Seals pop up occasionally, curious black eyes peeking above the water, as if to say, "You humans really are a strange bunch." One last quip from a crewmate: "I'll bet the seals are smelling all that jam and wondering when dessert will be served." All joking aside, you feel a tingle of nervous anticipation. Just as you're about to step into the ship's galley to warm up, the watchman yells, "Ice ahead! Big flow to starboard." Your heart quickens. The time for chatter is over. The real challenge begins as the vessel tries to dodge the first of what will be many frozen obstacles. You hold onto the side, bracing yourself for the jolt. The wind hisses, the sails strain, and every nerve in your body begs you to keep your wits about you. The jam-packed hold is silent, though lined with neat rows of potential comfort. You can't see it right now, but you sense it's there. Soon, the ice and the gloom will test your resolve. Yet for the moment, you feel a flicker of reassurance knowing that sweetness lies within arm's reach. You brace yourself as the ship grinds against a loose patch of sea ice, the wooden hull groaning like an old door hinge that's taken on too much winter chill. The initial impact feels like a warning shot from nature, just a reminder that you're sailing deeper into one of the most inhospitable regions on the planet. Yet, amid the scraping and crunching, you press on, determined to weave through these frozen obstacles in search of that elusive route. Shouts ring out from the deck above, and the sails adjust to gain the slightest advantage from a meager wind that whistles across the bitter water. There's no telling where the next large flow might drift. You step carefully, mindful that the slightest miscalculation could crack the hull. Despite the tension, there's an undercurrent of awe all around you. Icebergs glisten in the faint sunlight, painting the horizon with jagged, pale blue shapes. As the day wears on, you notice how quickly the Arctic can shift from serene to threatening. One moment, the sunlight catches the ice in a brilliant display of shimmering crystals. The next, clouds roll in, smothering everything in a grim, grey haze. With each passing minute, the temperature seems to sink lower, stealing warmth from your body and biting at the tip of your nose. You keep your eyes peeled, scanning the waters for any sign of an open channel that will guide you forward. Though you suspect the channel might be just as jam-packed with ice as it is with potential. A hearty laugh erupts from behind you. You spot a group of sailors huddled around a small barrel, passing around mugs of steaming tea. One man quips, "Think the polar bears would enjoy a jam sandwich if we offered." Another replies, "I'd rather keep my hands attached, thanks." There's the second laugh, but the undercurrent is clear. You're all too aware that you're not at the top of the food chain here. You make your way to the helm, where the ship's navigator is diligently examining charts. The plan is straightforward in theory. Press northwest, push against the ice, find a navigable route. But in practice, it's a dance of near constant improvisation. Historic accounts say that many 19th century expeditions would cling to the edges of known waters, trying to edge deeper into uncharted territory each season. Commanders would consult not only the official Admiralty maps, but also any first-hand knowledge gleaned from whalers who had ventured north before. One mainstream historical fact stands out. The Royal Navy spent a fortune on Arctic expeditions during this period, convinced that discovering a northwest passage would bestow immense prestige and commercial gain upon Britain. Of course, your vessel isn't just a cargo carrier for jam and biscuits. It's also outfitted with what was considered cutting-edge equipment for the time's small coal-fired heaters, insulated cabins, and collapsible boats that can be lowered onto the ice if the ship becomes trapped. That said, by modern standards, it's almost laughably inadequate, like trying to climb Everest in a pair of dress shoes. Yet in the 19th century, these expeditions were the apex of nautical innovation. Your boots, thick with leather and lined with coarse wool, might still leave your toes numb, but it's better than nothing. There's one particularly quirky tidbit that the older sailors share with you while you gather for lunch some expeditions used to bring along portable ice houses for experiments. They'd chip away large chunks of ice, store them in these makeshift enclosures, and then measure how long it took them to melt under various conditions. Supposedly, this research was meant to optimize the use of ice for drinking water. But rumor has it, at least one crew tried to see if they could freeze entire crates of jam into giant blocks. Partially as a joke, partially to test how well the sticky stuff handled extreme temperatures. Imagine chiseling at a chest, high block of strawberry jam just to sweeten your biscuit. Practical? Probably not, but the stories remain. A sudden gust of wind whips across your face, jolting you out of the anecdote. The deck beneath you tilts. The ship has found a brief corridor between towering walls of ice. There's a flurry of activity, ropes being pulled, sails being trimmed, voices echoing across the timber. You can't help but marvel at how quickly the crew adapts to the changing environment. In these waters, even a few hours can bring about conditions no one saw coming. Soon you notice the water ahead looks clearer, a deep slate color unbroken by white shards. Hushed excitement spreads, maybe there's a path. But the captain, standing tall despite the wind lashing his heavy coat, warns everyone to stay vigilant. He reminds you that open channels in the Arctic can close faster than you can say, cranberry jam. Still, the fleeting hope keeps the blood pumping. A witty remark travels down the deck. We're racing the ice, lads, and I think the ice might be winning. You smirk at the thought of an actual foot race with drifting floes, as though each floating slab had its own personality. Then again, in this environment, the ice does seem almost alive, crackling and groaning, shifting unpredictably as the current and wind conspire to reshape everything around you. Historians still argue whether these expeditions were propelled more by genuine scientific curiosity or by the allure of national glory. Were the captains truly seeking knowledge about uncharted seas and polar climate patterns, or were they chasing knighthoods and honor back home? Perhaps it was a bit of both. The crew around you might favor the latter explanation. They're risking their necks for a claim to fame that, in all likelihood, but won't pay off for them personally. But on the rare nights when the sky is clear and the auroras dance overhead, the scientific wonder becomes its own kind of reward. As you navigate the channel, you hear the familiar clink of spoons against tin cups. Someone is already celebrating with a bit of jam, laced tea. One of your shipmates notices you eyeing the jar and says, "Don't worry, friend, there's plenty to go around. Though if we don't find open water, we'll be eating jam for breakfast, lunch, and dinner until the end of time." That's your third playful jab of the day about the ubiquitous preserve. You grin, imagining a future archaeologist unearthing your remains and remarking, "It appears they consumed nothing but raspberry jam for months." It's remarkable how an item as simple as fruit preserves can become such a focal point. Back home, it's just a spread for toast. Here it's liquids or semi-solid morale. After an exhausting shift on the ice, the smallest taste of sweetness can momentarily transport you to a cozier, safer place. By late afternoon, the temperature starts to plummet again, the sun dipping behind thick clouds. With no solid shore in sight, you realize you'll be anchoring amid the ice floes for the night. An uneasy proposition, to say the least. If the ice shifts suddenly, it could pinch the hull. But that's a risk you'll have to take. Torches are lit, their glow casting eerie shadows on the sails. The sea breathes in quiet sloshes, an occasional chunk of ice bobbing against the hull. Crew members huddle together, recounting stories of other expeditions that disappeared entirely. It's almost comforting to know you have each other. Nobody wants to endure this lonely tundra of water and ice by themselves. And if all else fails, there's still jam. Fatigue creeps into your bones and your eyelids grow heavy. The day's excitement, the near scrapes, the jokes, the bitter cold, has drained you more than you realized. You find a spot sheltered from the wind, wriggle into a relatively warm nook, and let the steady rocking of the ship lull you. In the back of your mind, you can't shake the notion that tomorrow might bring even tougher challenges, but for now you welcome any chance to rest. The shifting ice outside provides a strange lullaby, creaking like a dozing giant. The truth is, no matter how prepared you are, the Arctic remains a realm of uncertainties. Still, you cling to optimism, reminding yourself that if these waters grant you passage, you'll be among the lucky few to leave footprints, or at least hull tracks, in a place most humans will never see. As you drift off, a final wry thought crosses your mind. Here's hoping we don't run out of jam. Morning arrives in a sluggish haze, as though the Arctic night is reluctant to loosen its grip. You stir from your cramped corner and pull your coat tighter, noticing that a thin layer of frost has formed along the edge of your sleeves. Outside, the ship's timbers pop and groan. You blink sleep from your eyes, and your gaze settles on the stacked crates in the corner. Those infamous crates of jam that have everyone talking. It's a small comfort to know they're still there, unassuming sentinels of sweetness in a brutal environment. As you step onto the deck, the air is sharp enough to sting your lungs. A few faint rays of greyish light reflect off the ice floes around you, creating a mirror-like landscape that appears to stretch forever. The forecast for the day is the same as always: cold, uncertain, and jammy. Someone calls you over for breakfast, more hardtack biscuits with a dollop of fruit preserve. You can't help but smile at how something so simple has become so critical. You pass a grinning sailor who's busy scrubbing the deck. He tips his cap and remarks, "I'd trade my left boot for a good, fresh baguette." Another crewmate chimes in, "I'd trade both boots for a warm pastry with jam." The exchange prompts laughter, a brief moment of levity that feels surprisingly precious here. Funny how the promise of a sugary spread can keep spirits afloat, especially when surrounded by endless ice. The reason jam holds such significance goes beyond flavor. Sugar is a high-energy source that can boost morale and provide quick, easily accessible calories. In conditions where you burn extra energy just trying to stay warm, every bit helps. One mainstream historical fact to note: by the mid-1800s, the British Royal Navy had standardized various forms of preserved food: salted meat, pickled vegetables, and yes, jams and jellies. While not as iconic as the daily rum ration, jam was no less important in bolstering sailors' nutritional intake and psychological well-being on lengthy voyages. As you linger near the crates, you picture factories back in Britain churning out glass jars packed with strawberries, blackcurrants, and gooseberries. The process involves boiling fruit with sugar until it thickens, then sealing it away to prevent spoilage. Although the method is tried and true, it still feels like a small miracle that these jars remain edible after months at sea and in sub-zero conditions. It's as if each jar is a time capsule of summer sweetness, an artifact from a kinder season. Even so, historians still argue whether jam provided enough vitamin C to meaningfully reduce scurvy, or if it was more of a psychological crutch. Officially, citrus juice and fresh produce were the most effective measures, but those were scarce in polar regions. Plus, some admirals questioned how effectively bottled lemon juice retained its potency over time. Jam wasn't always the perfect scurvy preventative, but it did contain some nutrients, especially if certain berries were used. And in a pinch, anything with real fruit could be a lifesaver. You take a moment to watch one of the officers conducting an inventory. He's flipping through a battered logbook, checking each crate number. You overhear him muttering, £500, give or take. Enough to keep us sweet for months. You suppress a snort at how that last phrase sounds unintentionally humorous. But truly, the jam is a form of currency here, too, an asset so valuable that it's doled out carefully to ensure no one sneaks extra spoonfuls. A quirky tidbit floats around the galley apparently. Some sailors believe that certain berry jams have mystical properties. Raspberry jam is said to ward off frostbite if applied to the skin, though you're 99.9% sure that's nonsense. Rubbing sugar-laden preserves on your body in polar climate sounds more like a comedic anecdote than legitimate medical advice. But desperation can drive people to strange measures, and rumors thrive in the isolation. One crewman even jokes that if the jam is dark enough, you can smear it on your face like war paint to frighten off polar bears. You decide it's best not to test that theory. As the morning wears on, a call goes out for volunteers to chip ice off the bow. You grab a pick and join a small group making their way forward. The hull has accumulated a crust of frozen spray, heavy enough to affect the ship's balance. Each swing sends shards of ice scattering across the deck, and after a few minutes, your arms burn from the effort. Eventually, you pause, catching your breath, as flecks of ice cling to your eyelashes. Someone cracks a joke. If only we could mix this ice with jam, we'd have instant sorbet. You grin, imagining Arctic explorers hosting a dessert buffet for seagulls and polar bears. Physical labor helps warm your body, but it also reminds you of how little margin for error exists here. A slip of the pick or a misjudged step on slippery planks, and you'd be nursing more than just a bruised ego. On the bright side, your thorough scraping gradually reveals the sturdy timbers beneath, and the crew can see that the hull remains in decent shape. With any luck, you won't have to rely on those crates of jam for medicinal use anytime soon. Once you finish chipping away the worst of the ice, you head below deck. The air inside the ship feels marginally less frigid, and the interplay of flickering lantern light creates a cozy, if cramped, atmosphere. You settle on a small wooden stool while someone ladles out hot tea. One of the younger sailors rummages through the ration stores, pulling out a jar of marmalade for everyone to share. He raises the jar like a triumphant treasure, and you can't help but be reminded of how each spoonful has to be allocated wisely. There's a sense of camaraderie in that moment. You might all hail from different backgrounds. Some are seasoned naval men, others are adventurers chasing some nebulous form of glory. But now you're bound by the challenge of surviving the Arctic. A third joke of the day emerges when a crewmate proposes naming the ship Jammy Dodger, prompting a small chorus of chuckles. It's silly, yes, but it reflects how the sweet preserve has become an unofficial mascot for this journey. Between sips of tea, you flip through a journal that details previous expeditions to these latitudes. You notice repeated mentions of rationing. By the 7th month, jam stores were running perilously low, or high consumption of jam continues to be a challenge to supply. Over and over, explorers from decades past documented how essential these preserves were, not just to quell hunger, but to keep morale afloat during the darkest stretches. It dawns on you that while technology has advanced somewhat, the fundamental human need for comfort in the face of adversity remains unchanged. As you read further, you see that some explorers even tried to replicate jam making in the field. They'd gather wild berries during brief Arctic summers, stew them with sugar from the ship's stores, and seal them in whatever containers they could find. It was a risky endeavor. Rarely did they have enough fruit to make more than a few jars, and the short growing season left little time for foraging. Still, the very act of creating something sweet in such a harsh environment must have felt like a tiny rebellion against the cold. Outside, the wind begins to pick up again, and you hear the sails flap overhead. The ship rocks, stirring a low, resonant groan through its joints. You close the journal and stand, bracing yourself for the next shift. The day's challenges loom: navigate around ice floes, measure the thickness of pack ice, chart unknown inlets. Through it all, the jam remains a steadfast companion, offering a momentary escape from the brutality of this place. Before you head back on deck, one of the ship's officers gives you a pat on the shoulder. "Keep your spirits high," he says quietly. "Remember, if the worst comes, we've got enough jam to last a few lifetimes." You both share a wary smile, but deep down, you know you'd trade every jar in a heartbeat for a sliver of sunshine and a safe passage home. Yet for now, jam is the best you've got, a sweet anchor in a sea of uncertainties. Tomorrow, you'll face whatever the Arctic throws at you, warmed by the knowledge that in your pocket or your pack, there's always a spoonful of hope waiting in a glass jar. The moment you step back on deck, you feel the cold pierce your clothing like 1,000 tiny needles. No matter how many layers you wear, the Arctic air manages to sneak in, reminding you that comfort is a distant luxury here. Your breath crystallizes the instant it leaves your mouth, forming a brief, swirling cloud before it vanishes into the bleak sky. It's a stark reality. Not only are you surrounded by ice, you're enveloped in it, head to toe, inside and out. Daily life starts to take on a grueling rhythm. You wake to the ship's bell, pull yourself from a restless sleep, then immediately layer up for the biting cold. Tasks that seem straightforward back home, washing your face, tying your boots, become epic endeavors when your fingers can barely bend. By the time you manage to buckle your coat, you're panting like you've run a mile. The Arctic spares no one. Even the toughest explorers soon learn humility. A few days pass in this frigid purgatory, and you begin to sense the mental toll of isolation. The ship is your entire world now. A few dozen souls share these cramped quarters, and you might not see another vessel or even an inch of inhabited land for weeks, possibly months. The mind, desperate for distraction, turns to little routines to stave off cabin fever. You find yourself tracking how many tins of jam get opened in a day, or counting the steps between one end of the deck to the other for no reason other than to say you did it. One time, you laugh out loud when you realize you've been humming the same lullaby for hours, a tune you didn't even know you remembered from childhood. Amid these challenges, you discover that humor is a lifeline. One morning, after you slip for the 3rd time on an icy rung of the ladder, someone cracks a joke. Keep that up, and we'll start calling you deck diver. It's silly, but it breaks the tension as you nurse your bruised backside. Later, you overhear another jibe about how the Arctic wind sounds suspiciously like your mother-in-law, prompting a round of muffled chuckles. And just before evening rations, A third quip rings out. If we get any colder, we'll be chiseling jam cubes instead of spooning them. That one actually elicits a cackle, just enough to nudge gloom into the corners of the room. No matter how bleak it seems, mealtime remains a highlight. That's when you and your fellow explorers gather below deck for the day's ration of salted meat, hardtack, and of course jam. Huddled around a small heater, you can almost forget the vast emptiness waiting outside, but as soon as you head topside, the Arctic reminds you that you're merely guests in its kingdom. The wind howls across the ice fields, and the ship lurches, testing your sea legs on a fresh patch of churning water. One mainstream historical fact about these voyages is that, despite the hardships, many explorers meticulously recorded scientific observations. Temperature logs, wind speeds, even wildlife sightings. There's a kind of stoic perseverance in systematically noting how fast your hands go numb in different weather conditions. Under normal circumstances, it might seem trivial, but on these journeys, every detail might hold the key to future survival or perhaps the next breakthrough in understanding polar climates. When your shift is over, you slip away to a cramped corner below deck, where you take a moment to thaw. The edges of your coat are stiff with frost, and you peel off your gloves with a series of sharp cracks. Every breath you draw is laced with the tang of stale air and the faint, sugary hint of jam that seems to permeate everything by now. You close your eyes and try to recall the gentle hum of civilization, carriages on cobblestone streets, laughter in candlelit taverns, any sound that isn't the constant moan of ice against the hull. Yet for all its brutality, the Arctic can still stun you with moments of silent grandeur. When the sky is clear, the low sun casts elongated shadows across the ice, transforming it into a pastel wilderness of pinks and blues. Sometimes, a pod of narwhals surfaces near the ship, their long tusks glinting in the watery light. It's a reminder that, beneath the endless sheets of ice, life thrives in forms you can scarcely imagine. A quirky tidbit you might overhear in the galley a few years back. A certain expedition leader insisted on bringing a piano on board, hoping music would keep morale high during the long winters. Legend claims that halfway through their second winter, the piano legs froze to the deck, and the crew had to break it free with chisels, turning the rescue into an impromptu jam session. Emphasis on jam, as they apparently rewarded themselves with spoonfuls of raspberry preserve afterward. Truth or tall tale, it underscores the lengths some captains went to soften the edges of the Arctic's isolation. And still, you find yourself wondering why. Why do you endure this? Why do nations invest fortunes sending ships to test these perilous waters? Historians still argue whether the driving force was raw ambition, to find the Northwest Passage before any other country, or whether genuine scientific curiosity spurred these voyages. Perhaps it was a blend of both, a testament to humanity's insatiable desire to map every corner of the globe and wave a flag over it. You can't help but admire, in a weird, shivering way, the resilience it takes to keep going day after day. The bitter cold isn't a novelty, it's a constant drain, sapping energy and clarity. Each night, as you wrap yourself in blankets, you consider how easily one misstep could be your last. A wrong turn in a blizzard, a cracked hull in a field of pack ice. It doesn't take much for this environment to claim you. Yet here you are, forging ahead, methodically charting new territory, while the jam jars clink reassuringly in their crates. Sometimes you poke your head above deck in the wee hours, just to see if anything has changed. Usually, you find a silent realm of silver, tinted ice and dark water. But on lucky nights, the sky erupts in rippling curtains of green and purple, the aurora borealis dancing across the horizon. In those moments, the Arctic almost feels gentle, as though it's offering a temporary reprieve from the cold glare of day. A hush falls over the crew, and even the cynics among you can't help but feel a glimmer of wonder. But wonder alone won't keep you alive. Practicalities remain paramount, continuing to ration your supplies meticulously, checking the hull for leaks, and scanning for polar bears that might wander onto the floe. And yes, the occasional joke surfaces about bribing a bear with jam, though no one's actually bold enough to attempt it. In these endless days of chill and isolation, you learn that true exploration demands an unyielding spirit. The Arctic strips away pretense, it forces you to confront your physical and mental limits. Yet every time you pass one of those crates and see the row of gleaming jars, you're reminded that small comforts can bridge the gap between despair and hope. Jam might not seem like a big deal in the grand scheme, but here, it's everything. Symbolizing the taste of home, the promise of sweetness amid the unrelenting cold. Eventually, you head to your bunk, mind swirling with thoughts of what tomorrow will demand. Perhaps more ice to chip, more routes to chart, or a sudden shift in weather that forces you to adapt on the fly. Despite the challenges, a faint sense of gratitude stirs within you. Gratitude for still being here, for the chance to witness such raw beauty, and for that next spoonful of jam that waits just below deck. You awaken to find your joints aching a little more than usual, a subtle reminder that your body is working overtime just to stay warm. Climbing out of your bunk, you notice a cluster of sailors huddled in the corner, passing around a jar of jam like it's the Holy Grail. You make your way over, curious about what's got everyone so fixated, and someone offers you a spoonful. You swallow the syrupy mixture, savoring the burst of sweet, tart flavor, and it feels as though a small spark of life ignites in your chest. You can't help but think about how crucial these jars of fruit preserves have become. Day by day, you feel yourself growing a little more fatigued, a little more starved for anything fresh. There's this constant, nagging worry in the back of your mind: scurvy, the dreaded ailment that stalks mariners. In the most oversimplified terms, scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency that leads to bleeding gums, weakened immune systems, and ultimately a horrifying breakdown of the body if left unchecked. The older hands aboard have seen it firsthand, and their whispered warnings about teeth falling out and slow, healing wounds only heighten your unease. But jam, it turns out, might offer more than just a morale boost. Traditional jam is made by boiling fruit with sugar, which preserves not only the fruit's flavor, but at least some of its nutritional content. Though the actual vitamin C levels vary wildly, depending on the fruit and how long it's cooked. Even if it's not a perfect fix, every spoonful can help bridge the gap when the ship's stores of citrus or pickled vegetables start to run low. A mainstream historical fact: many 19th century crews did carry bottled lemon or lime juice specifically to combat scurvy, but spoilage and adulteration were issues. Some bottles contained watered-down juice or even chalky additives, rendering them next to useless. Jam, at least, was less likely to suffer that fate because of its high sugar content and its popularity in daily rations. That said, historians still argue whether jam itself provided significant protection against scurvy. Some claim that by the time the fruit was cooked down, it lost most of its beneficial nutrients, offering little more than quick calories. Others point out that early explorers noted fewer symptoms when jam was regularly consumed, though correlation doesn't necessarily prove causation. It's possible the jam was a stand-in for the real solution: any source of fresh or reasonably preserved fruit. Regardless, when the polar night's gloom closes in, you cling to hope wherever you can find it, even if it's sealed in a sticky jar. It's not all serious, though. Scurvy or no, you find plenty of ways to joke about your nutritional predicament. One of your fellow sailors quips, "I'd rather have scurvy of the teeth than heartbreak of the stomach. Pass me another spoonful, please." You don't envy him his sense of humor, but you do appreciate the levity. Another wisecrack: "Who needs limes when you've got strawberry jam? Put that in the history books." You chuckle, though a tiny part of you wonders if your teeth will last the entire voyage. As you head above deck for your shift, you pass an abandoned lab station from a previous expedition, a cramped corner stuffed with dusty instruments and old charts. You catch sight of some scribbled notes pinned to a board, referencing the importance of fresh juices for staving off scurvy. A few lines down, there's a mention of jam as a secondary measure. The handwriting is faded, but the sense of urgency leaps off the page. Whoever wrote this lived with the very same dread you do. The day's work is more of the same: scraping ice, charting wind patterns, and occasionally steering the ship through narrow corridors of slush and flow. Each time you duck below deck, you notice how conversations inevitably drift back to food. One of the ship's cooks, an ex-merchant sailor who once worked a pastry kitchen, has been musing about creating a jam turnover to boost morale. His plan is half-baked. Literally, he's got flour, some grace, and those never-ending crates of jam. The tricky part is orchestrating the baking in a tiny stove that's more furnace than oven. But he's stubborn, and you can't help but root for the guy. Late in the afternoon, you see him triumphantly wave a small pastry in the air. It's misshapen and slightly charred, but it smells heavenly, sputtery, and a little bit burnt. He starts handing out slices, a warm grin on his face. It's a fleeting moment of bliss, an unexpected treat in this barren world of ice and wind. You bite into it, flinching at the crunch of overcooked crust. But the jam oozes through, coating your tongue in sugary relief. Another quirk of life here: the simplest pleasures assume monumental importance, especially when any fresh produce is but a distant memory. If scurvy does rear its ugly head, you'll start seeing the signs: bleeding gums, fatigue, maybe bruising on the skin. For now, at least, the crew seems mostly healthy, though you notice a few guys complaining about joint pain more than they used to. A small store of bottled lemon juice is kept under lock and key, rationed carefully. Jam is more abundant, albeit less guaranteed to fend off disease. Still, morale matters almost as much as vitamins out here. Despair can cripple a crew as surely as any illness. That night, as you stand watch on the freezing deck, your mind wanders to a quirky tidbit you overheard from an old polar hand. He swore that some explorers dabbled in the art of jam-based poultices. The idea was, if you had a wound and no better ointment, you'd smear a bit of jam on a cloth and wrap it around the cut. Supposedly, it prevented infection by sealing the wound from frigid air. More likely, it attracted curious critters looking for a sugar fix. You can't decide if it's brilliant or just ridiculous, but the mental picture of a bandaged jam burrito makes you snicker under your breath. The temperature drops even further, a biting chill that creeps into your bones. You squint at the horizon where swirling clouds hint at a possible storm. A stiff breeze rattles the sails, and the ship lists slightly. The officer in charge of your watch calls out for everyone to secure loose gear. You hurriedly tie down crates and coil ropes, the ever-present possibility of a gale keeping your heart thumping. Once everything's secured, you pause by the rail, gazing at an expanse of drifting ice. The moon emerges through a break in the clouds, revealing a shimmering seascape of white and silver. It's breathtaking enough that you momentarily forget the cold. The sea's hush is broken only by the distant groans of shifting icebergs. You close your eyes, allowing the moment to wash over you, a brief lull in an otherwise relentless routine. Your reverie is shattered by a crewman bringing you a tin mug of hot water, into which he stirred a generous spoonful of jam. Scurvy stew, he calls it with a smirk. You take a sip, wincing at the sweetness, but grateful for the warmth. In the grand scheme, maybe this concoction isn't the perfect prophylactic. Still, every little bit helps, and at least it's a sign that your shipmates are looking out for each other. After your watch ends, you descend below deck. The hum of conversation quiets as people drift off to sleep, cocooned in blankets. You slip into your bunk, legs aching from hours of standing. A heaviness settles over you, not just physical exhaustion but the weight of the unknown. How long will you be out here? Will you ever catch a glimpse of open sea leading west? Or is the pack ice destined to hold you hostage? Fatigue pulls you under quickly, but before you surrender to slumber, your mind paints one final image: a jar of jam, shining in a lantern's glow. It's the simplest of comforts, and maybe, just maybe, it helps more than you realize. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and face the same stark reality: frigid air, slippery decks, and the lingering specter of scurvy. But at least there's a fighting chance, thanks in part to that sticky, sugary companion. When you wake the next morning, the first thing you register is the cold, a relentless force that seems determined to seep through every layer of fabric you own. Your breath forms white puffs in front of you, and the tip of your nose feels as if it's been replaced by a small shard of ice. It's time to face yet another day in the Arctic. But before you drag yourself from your bunk, you recall some of the oddball methods your shipmates have been whispering about. Tricks to stay warm when the usual woolen socks and hot tea just aren't cutting it. Lately, you've heard rumors of the heated jam hack, the idea that warming a small jar of jam in boiling water, then tucking it inside your coat, could function like a makeshift hot water bottle. You're not entirely convinced. One wrong move, and you might end up with scalding berry syrup leaking down your torso. But desperation breeds creativity out here. You've also seen a few crew members clutching jam jars to their chests, as if hugging them close might somehow coax extra warmth from the sugary contents. One man even claimed that the sugar retains heat longer than plain water, though you suspect he just wants an excuse to keep jam within arm's reach. You decide to give it a try one evening, carefully submerging a sealed jar of blackcurrant jam in the galley's steaming kettle. You watch the bubbles rise around the glass, half expecting it to crack. But it holds firm. After a few minutes, you gingerly fish it out with a pair of tongs, wrap it in a strip of cloth, and cradle it like a newborn puppy. To your surprise, it radiates a comforting warmth against your chest, though you can't help but imagine the mess you'd have on your hands, and everywhere else if it broke. Joke number one for the day. Congratulations, you're now the proud parent of a jam baby. Back on deck, you notice the more traditional survival hacks as well. Layered furs have always been a mainstay. You'll see men bundled in everything from caribou hides to thick wool coats layered beneath sealskin jackets. A mainstream historical fact, is that 19th century Arctic explorers often relied on fur garments learned from, and sometimes traded for with, local Inuit communities, who perfected the art of staying warm in sub-zero climates long before any Europeans arrived. Fur pants, fur boots, fur gloves, if you can name it. Someone's probably tried to make a version of it from an animal hide. Unfortunately, with so many layers, you move about as gracefully as a barrel rolling uphill. In the midst of these bulky ensembles, you hear the occasional whisper of even more bizarre tactics. One story goes that certain crews used to rub their bodies with goose grease or whale blubber, assuming that a layer of fat on the skin would seal in heat. You shudder at the thought of slathering yourself in thick, oily substances, only to step outside into howling winds that might freeze the grace in place. But when you're staring down the Arctic's lethal chill, what once seemed outlandish can start to sound strangely logical. Over dinner, you ask a shipmate if he's ever tried the goose grace approach. He replies with a smirk, "Only once. Trust me, smelling like a roast dinner got old fast." Joke number 2, delivered with perfect timing. Then he recounts how the grease seemed to freeze into a waxy shell on his skin, making it nearly impossible to move without feeling like a penguin in too tight trousers. You both share a laugh, but the subtext is clear. Survival here often requires a level of inventiveness that borders on absurd. You also learn of a fringe strategy combining body heat in buddy tents. The idea is simple: 2 or more people huddle together under layered blankets, generating enough collective warmth to stave off the worst of the cold. Naturally, it's not the most comfortable arrangement, especially when personal space is at a premium. But in dire circumstances, you do what you must. There's a half-joke, half-warning circulating among the crew. Snore too loud, and you'll get kicked out into the cold. Historians still argue whether these elaborate survival hacks really moved the needle in terms of preventing frostbite and hypothermia, or if they were largely psychological comforts. After all, the Arctic environment can't be tamed by a single trick. Even layering fur atop more fur might only help so much when the temperatures plunge far below zero. Some believe that these bizarre tactics offered just enough mental reassurance to keep the explorers pushing forward, while others maintain that any advantage, no matter how small, was worth the effort. During yet another biting windstorm, you spot the cook in the corner, trying a new variation on the heated jam idea. He's got multiple jars lined up along the galley stove, and is distributing them to the crew like magical talismans. He jokes that if anyone complains about the jam's temperature, they owe him their dessert ration for a week. That's joke number 3. Everyone chuckles, though you can't help but note how the line between humor and desperation grows thinner every day. Despite the eccentricities of these survival hacks, you see glimmers of success. One of the older officers, who's suffered from perpetually cold fingers, begins using a jam warmer every morning, essentially strapping a warmed jar to each hand for a few minutes before heading on deck. It sounds comical, but he swears his digits haven't felt this limber since the journey began. He even claims to regain some feeling in his fingertips. Perhaps it's the sugar-laden jam's ability to retain heat, or maybe just the placebo effect. Either way, you decide not to question a method that keeps frostbite at bay. Layering, rubbing, huddling, and heated jam jars. These might not be the refined solutions you'd read about in a modern survival manual, but the Arctic rarely allows for refinement. You do whatever you can to endure. As another day bleeds into a cold twilight, you run through a mental checklist of your own routine: double socks, spare gloves tucked inside your coat, a strip of cloth wrapped around your face, and a jam jar waiting to be heated if things get truly dire. You say to yourself that if you make it home, you'll open an entire shop dedicated to Arctic survival hacks. Though it might be a niche market, by the time you climb into your bunk, your body is still shaking off the chill. You cup your hands, noticing how raw they look, and try to imagine a future where the sun's warmth is no longer a distant dream. The ship rocks gently, and you hear the muffled chatter of those still on watch. You wonder how many of them have jam jars tucked under their coats right now. In another time and place, this whole heated jam idea would seem absurd, maybe even comedic. But here, with ice creeping in from every angle, it's just another tool in your arsenal. A small, sweet flicker of heat against an endless winter. Rest comes in fits and starts, but when you finally drift off, your last thought is that tomorrow might bring a fresh set of challenges, and maybe a fresh set of experiments. Because out here, it's not enough to have a single trick up your sleeve. Survival is a constant dance of improvisation, a daily puzzle whose solutions shift like the ice floes you sail through. If a jar of jam can help tip the odds in your favor, you'll take it, stickiness and all. Not long after you awaken, the ship's bell tolls in that dull, hollow way it does when thick ice surrounds you. The vessel hardly budges, imprisoned again by the shifting floes. So you take the chance to explore the lower decks. You've never ventured this far into the cargo holds before, but the tight corridors lead you to a makeshift archive room where aged logbooks and tattered journals line the shelves. A single lantern flickers overhead, throwing shadows that dance across the damp wood panels. You flip through a brittle page, squinting at elegant but hurried handwriting. It details a previous expedition that vanished without a trace. No final entries, no farewell letters, just a creeping sense of dread as you read the fragmented words. The last line is smudged beyond recognition, making your stomach tighten. You snap the journal shut, heart thumping. You step into a cramped passageway and nearly bump into the ship's quartermaster. He's shaking his head, muttering, "Another ghost ship story." You nod, curious. He sighs, recounting how legends of missing crews have haunted the Arctic for decades. Entire vessels, dozens of men, gone, leaving behind half-finished meals, personal belongings, and in at least one grim case, jam jars frozen to tables. It's that last detail that sticks with you, how something so mundane as jam could become the final clue in a haunting tableau. In hushed conversations, you hear about the Phantom sloop, a small, two-masted craft supposedly spotted adrift among the ice, its deck eerily empty. Another rumor mentions a lifeboat from a lost expedition found on a desolate shore, filled with skeletons, each clutching meager belongings, including a tin of fruit preserves. One mainstream historical fact is that over a dozen British Arctic expeditions went missing or had catastrophic outcomes in the 1800s, fueling countless rescue missions and an avalanche of fearful speculation. You soon realize that these tales are more than bedtime stories, they're cautionary reminders. The Arctic can swallow entire ships like they were mere playthings. Men vanish, leaving behind journals with scrawled notes about shifting ice, dark shapes, and unearthly howling winds. Some accounts border on the supernatural, describing eerie lights flickering among the floes at night. Historians still argue whether these were simply auroras or something more mysterious. Reflections on ice crystals, illusions brought on by starvation, or phenomena yet unexplained. Later that day, as you work alongside the crew to reinforce the hull with extra planking, an attempt to brace against the ice's relentless pressure, a grizzled veteran settles up to you. He's one of those sailors who's been around the polar block more than once. "Ever see a ghost, kid?" he asks. You shake your head, not sure how to answer. He scoffs, then whispers about a time he glimpsed a spectral figure on a far-off iceberg. Looked like a man in a tattered naval coat, waving at us, beckoning us closer. When we turned the ship to investigate, he vanished. You feel a chill, and not just from the wind. Could it have been a mirage? A trick of the light? Or the spirit of a lost explorer? Jokester that you are. Your first impulse is to quip. Maybe he was holding a jam jar, hoping for a refill. The veteran offers a thin smile, but there's worry in his eyes. Joke number 1. That night, the wind rattles the rigging, and you drift in and out of uneasy sleep. Each time you close your eyes, you picture that ghostly figure on an iceberg, beckoning. You can almost hear his voice. Bring me warmth, bring me jam. This bizarre mental image makes you snort softly. Joke number 2. But the tension remains. You emerge at dawn to find the horizon swallowed by thick, low-hanging clouds. Snow falls in a slow, relentless drift, masking any sign of landmarks. Somewhere out in that wide expanse lie the bones of past expeditions. Men who once believed they could chart the unchartable. You rummage in the galley for breakfast, half-heartedly spooning jam onto a crust of stale biscuit. Even that sweet taste is overshadowed by the notion that you might be following in the doomed footsteps of explorers who never came home. A quirky tidbit surfaces during the midday meal when someone mentions that certain vanished vessels were rumored to carry cursed cargo. One story claims that a captain had commissioned a shipment of exotic plants, aloe, ginger, and other medicinal herbs, only for them to rot and ferment in the hold, supposedly tainting the crew's minds with noxious fumes. Another rumor states that a sealed crate of jam was found with strange symbols etched into it, though no one's ever confirmed its origin. As with most Arctic lore, the line between fact and fiction is blurred by time and the region's eerie isolation. When the conversation lulls, you recall a detail from one of the journals. You'd skimmed a cryptic mention of footprints appearing in the snow around a camp, leading nowhere, as if the people who made them had vanished mid-step. The diary's author speculated about polar bears dragging victims away, or perhaps the crew wandering off in a delirious haze. It's sobering to realize that no matter how logical you try to be, the Arctic environment sets the stage for tales that defy easy explanations. Your own ship continues to drift north. The ice around you shifts and cracks, sometimes so loudly at night that it sounds like distant thunder. You huddle on deck, scanning the horizon with a spyglass, half expecting to glimpse a derelict ship looming out of the fog. You wonder if you did see one, would you even dare approach it? Or would you steer clear, haunted by the possibility that you'd witness some sign of its crew's fate? Still, you find a way to joke about it. Maybe it's a coping mechanism. Maybe it's just your style. Joke number 3 emerges in casual conversation when a mate says, "If I find a ghost ship, it better have a stash of jam still on board. Otherwise, I'm calling it a day." The others laugh, tension melting for a moment. Amid the rumors and ghost stories, one fact remains undeniable: the Arctic can claim whoever it chooses. Even the best, prepared explorers have succumbed to cold hunger or navigational errors. But the intangible nature of these vanishings, where entire crews simply drop off the face of the earth, lends a lingering horror that can't be shaken. The jam crates become a bittersweet motif in these narratives, a symbol of home and comfort that, in some cases, outlasts the men who carried it north. As you retreat to your bunk, your mind replays the day's unsettling images: footprints vanishing into nothingness, lost ships silently bobbing in frigid waters, spectral figures on iceberg outposts. There's no easy resolution. The Arctic keeps its secrets well. Perhaps that's part of what draws people here. The idea that, in a world being rapidly mapped and claimed, some mysteries remain untamed. You burrow under your blankets, listening to the wind whip across the deck, and wonder if future travelers will pore over your own journal entries, searching for answers about your fate. It's not a comfortable thought, but it lingers. Then you remind yourself you're still here, still breathing, and so long as the jam holds out, there's a measure of warmth in the darkness. You find yourself crouched in a dimly lit corner of the ship's lower deck, rummaging through an old trunk that creaks with every nudge. The hinge groans in protest as you lift the lid, revealing a jumble of antiquated gadgets, artifacts of an age when polar exploration was as much guesswork as it was courage. You pull out a heavy brass compass first. Its face is frosty, and you wipe away condensation to reveal a cluster of hairline cracks in the glass. Still, the needle wavers in the gloom, trying its best to point north as if it's determined to be useful even now. Next, you dig out a pair of goggles with round glass lenses, their edges lined with battered leather. A strange contraption dangles from them, perhaps a rudimentary attempt at preventing snow blindness by attaching side flaps. If you squint, you can see scratch marks, maybe left by an explorer who brushed too close to an iceberg. You can imagine how, back in its heyday, these goggles would have been considered cutting-edge technology, saving eyes from harsh glare off the ice. But by modern standards, they look more like something you'd find at a steampunk costume party. As you sift deeper, you uncover a cylindrical metal stove. Compact yet surprisingly heavy, it has a small door for feeding in coal or wood chips, plus a short chimney extension. You read in a half-torn manual that it's designed for use in cramped tents or on the deck of a whaling boat. The idea was that these stoves could provide localized heat in bitterly cold conditions. In practice, you suspect they heated more hands than rooms, forcing people to hover around them like moths around a lantern. One mainstream historical fact: many 19th century Arctic expeditions relied on these small, portable stoves not just for cooking but also for melting ice into drinking water. They were a lifeline, but also a danger if the fumes weren't properly vented. Farther in, you find a battered flintlock rifle, its wooden stock warped by moisture. By the mid-19th century, explorers were transitioning to more modern firearms, but old gear often lingered in supply caches. You recall how polar bears pose a real risk, large, intelligent predators that consider the occasional human fair game. Anyone venturing onto the ice pack alone often took a rifle for self-defense. Yet historians still argue whether these clunky, outdated weapons actually helped much against a rampaging bear. Some say the noise alone was enough to scare predators away, while others insist you'd need more than a single shot before reloading. Considering how your hands fumble in this cold, you're inclined to think the latter. A quirkier tidbit rests at the bottom of the trunk, a small canister labeled Arctic lotion. You flip it open and sniff. An odd mix of lavender and whale oil assaults your nose. Apparently, this lotion was marketed as a cure, all for frostbite, chapping, even scurvy, though you can't fathom how rubbing an oil on your skin would fix a vitamin deficiency. The instructions are hand-scrawled, warning the user to Apply twice daily, vigorously. You can't help but chuckle at the mental picture of some poor soul rubbing lavender, whale oil concoction all over, hoping it would magically ward off the biting cold. Joke number 1. It's the Arctic's version of a spa day. Whale oil massage, anyone. You carry your newfound treasures topside to show your crewmates. Under the weak daylight, they gather around with polite curiosity. One person inspects the archaic goggles and remarks how frost would probably turn the leather into stiff, unusable strips within hours. Another pokes at the old stove, speculating that it might have produced more smoke than heat. A third points to the flintlock rifle, joking that you'd better practice your aim, or you'll end up giving a polar bear just a mild tickle. Joke number 2. Listening to them banter, you realize how these relics shape your daily struggles even now. In the 19th century, explorers lacked advanced insulation, reliable synthetic fabrics, or modern firearms. They made do with trial and error contraptions that could fail at any moment. Even something as basic as waterproof boots was a big deal. Some men wore multiple pairs of wool socks, stuffed into stiff leather, and once the leather got soaked and froze, they practically walked around with blocks of ice for shoes. The leaps in gear technology since then are immense, yet out here, you still rely on many of the same principles: keep warm, stay dry, conserve energy. During a short break, you leaf through a century-old pamphlet detailing best practices for Arctic travel. Always keep a backup compass, say, in case one freezes or cracks. To store firearms in a sealed container to prevent rust. Carry a perpetual lamp, fueled by seal or whale oil, to ward off the darkness. You can't help but admire the sheer grit it took to survive. The pamphlet also recommends eating high-energy foods, including salted meats, lard, and yes, sweet preserves. It specifically mentions jam as a useful portable energy source. This reaffirms what you already suspected. The jam in your hold isn't just a fluke. Explorers recognized sugar's quick fuel long before energy bars existed. In a quiet moment, you reflect on how far you've come since the journey began. You can almost picture yourself in a black and white engraving, decked out in furs, wielding an outdated rifle, a jar of jam clipped to your belt like some bizarre accessory. The image is so absurd it elicits a chuckle. Joke number 3. But that's Arctic exploration in a nutshell, a blend of heroism, improvisation, and downright oddity. The sun dips, painting the ice in muted greys. You gather these relics and bring them to the quartermaster for safekeeping. He eyes the whale oil lotion with a mixture of disgust and amusement, then places it atop a stack of other oddities gleaned from rummaging. There's a sense that you're all curators of a living museum, each artifact telling a story of trial, error, and the unyielding desire to push boundaries. Later, you share a cup of jam, sweetened tea with a small group below deck. You trade stories about gear malfunctions, frozen compasses, tent poles snapping in blizzards, boots that disintegrate under constant exposure to salt water and ice. Someone pipes up with a cautionary tale apparently. A certain expedition's camp stove once tipped over in high wind, catching a tent on fire. Thanks to the low oxygen and extreme cold, the blaze died quickly, leaving nothing but scorched canvas and a black smudge on the snow. Everyone agrees that relying on outdated equipment can be a gamble. Yet there's a certain romance to it, isn't there? Those who ventured into these polar deserts a generation or two before you had even fewer resources and faced equally terrifying odds. Still, they charted unseen coastlines, recorded astronomical observations, and left behind diaries brimming with wonder, dread, and determination. Maybe that's why, despite the hardships, you feel a strange pride in carrying a piece of their legacy. Before you turn in for the night, you wander the deck, casting one last glance at the frozen horizon. The cold stings your cheeks, and you recall the musty trunk below, filled with items that once represented humanity's best attempts at mastering this hostile environment. In your pocket, you still have the battered compass, the cracks in its glass reflecting the moonlight. You touch it gingerly, pondering how many souls once staked their survival on that wobbling needle. A gust of wind rattles the rigging, and you pull your collar high, retreating below. As you settle into your bunk, you can't shake the thought that one day, your gear, your jam-stained gloves, your improvised heating tricks, might end up in someone else's trunk of curiosities, telling the next generation of explorers about the lengths you went to in order to coexist with the Arctic. For now, though, you just want to rest, cradling the faint hope that tomorrow's ice might shift in your favor. A hush falls over the ship's deck when the watchman spots movement on the horizon. Figures against the snow, too close to be just animals. You scramble up to get a better look, heart pounding at the possibility of human contact after so many weeks of isolation. As the shapes draw nearer, a wave of relief washes over you. These are the Inuit, the people who have thrived in these polar conditions for countless generations. Meeting them feels almost like encountering guardians of a land that has tried its best to lock you out. You observe a small group, perhaps a few families, approaching across the ice, pulling sleds laden with furs and supplies. Their clothing is thick, expertly sewn from animal hides, fitting snugly in a way that allows freedom of movement without letting the cold seep in. Compared to the layered chaos of your gear, they look streamlined and comfortable. The difference is stark, and you realize in a rush that your idea of warm clothing might be child's play to those who grow up in the Arctic. There's a bit of an awkward dance as both sides gauge how to greet one another. One of your officers steps forward, raising a gloved hand, and the Inuit leader nods, then glances back at his people, who respond with a few cautious steps. You can sense the tension, some combination of curiosity, caution, and maybe a sprinkle of concern. From your vantage point, you wonder if they already knew about your presence. The Arctic might seem vast and empty, but word travels in unexpected ways, especially if you're an interloper crashing through the ice on a giant wooden vessel. Eventually, through broken words, gestures, and a handful of interpreters, previous expeditions sometimes brought along men who had learned bits of the Inuit language. The two parties establish a fragile rapport. You learn that there's a settlement not far off, a scattering of huts made from ice blocks and skins, nestled near a patch of land where game occasionally gathers. It's a place that would appear inhospitable to outsiders, but to the Inuit, it's home. You're invited to visit. Your excitement is tempered by the cold reality of leaving the ship, but the chance to see how the Inuit live is too compelling to pass up. You bundle up, stepping onto the ice with your breath fogging around you, and follow the group. The crisp air stings your lungs, but you push forward, drawn by curiosity. After trudging a short distance, you come across something you never expected. A cluster of simple, low structures carved from packed snow, each with an entry tunnel designed to keep out the wind. Stepping inside, you're momentarily blinded by the relative warmth and the dim light. The interior smells faintly of animal fat from a soapstone lamp flickering near the center. A couple of sled dogs lounge in a corner, eyes half closed. An older Inuit woman beckons you closer, offering you a seat on a pelt-covered bench. The sense of hospitality, despite the limited resources, both amazes and humbles you. One mainstream historical fact becomes palpable. 19th century Arctic explorers frequently relied on Inuit knowledge to navigate the ice, hunt for game, and find safe shelters. Without local expertise, many expeditions would have perished much sooner, lacking the know how to survive. Hearing it is one thing, seeing it up close is another. You realize just how thoroughly the Inuit have mastered the secrets of this environment. They can read the ice by its color and texture, discerning which areas are safe to cross. They know which animals migrate when, and where the best fishing holes form beneath the frozen sea. In an effort to show goodwill, someone from your group produces a jar of jam, swirling it around with a spoon for your hosts to see. The Inuit children watch with wide eyes. This sticky, vibrant substance is unfamiliar to them. You take a small spoonful and offer it, smiling. The first brave taster licks it off the spoon, brow furrowing at the burst of sweetness, then breaks into a grin. A giggle ripples through the group. Soon others want to try. Joke number one emerges in your mind. We've officially introduced a sugar high to the Arctic. Your new acquaintances laugh and chatter among themselves, likely marveling at why on earth you'd haul hundreds of pounds of this syrupy fruit concoction into such a hostile realm. For them, whale blubber, seal meat, and fish provide essential fats and nutrients, foods that have sustained their people for generations. Historians still argue whether the Inuit diet, rich in raw meats and marine oils, offered a more effective defense against scurvy than the European reliance on boiled fruit and salted meats. Some experts believe the raw seal liver, high in vitamin C, prevented deficiency diseases better than jam ever could. Others maintain that contamination and spoilage in European rations were the bigger issues. The debate continues. After a few moments of jam tasting, you notice one of the Inuit hunters inspecting your boots with mild amusement. Through pantomime and a few words, he points to the thick fur lining his own footwear, then taps your leather boots, if to say, "No wonder your toes are freezing." You can't help but chuckle. Joke number two. Our feet might as well be wearing stiff pancakes compared to theirs. Outside, the Arctic sun casts a diffuse glow over the settlement. You watch as some men prepare sleds for a short journey, stacking supplies and harnessing dogs with remarkable efficiency. One of them beckons you to follow, indicating that they'll show you where to find breathing holes for seals, prime spots for hunting. Tentatively, you join them, bouncing on the sled as the dogs lunge forward. The ride is exhilarating, cold air cutting at your face, but your eyes are filled with the stark beauty of the snowy plains. They lead you to a patch of wind-sculpted ice, pointing to small cracks. You wouldn't have noticed them on your own, but these hunters read the faint signs like a map. They demonstrate how a patient hunter waits with a harpoon, listening for seal breaths. It's a waiting game that demands sharp instincts and a deep respect for the animal's cunning. For a moment, you imagine trying to explain jam to a wild seal. Joke number 3. Maybe you'd prefer fish jam if such a thing existed. You return to the settlement with a new perspective, your mind buzzing with the practical knowledge you've gleaned. These people have turned survival into an art form. They don't rely on jam as a morale booster. Their entire livelihood is structured around an understanding of the Arctic's rhythms. You sense how your own expeditions approach. Pushing forward with crates of European rations and untested technology might appear clumsy and naive by comparison. Before you depart, there's an exchange of small gifts. Knives, bits of metal, a few more spoonfuls of jam. You might not speak each other's language fluently, but gratitude transcends words. One of the women gestures at your coat's hood, miming a stitch pattern, implying she can show you how to tailor it better to keep out the wind. You nod enthusiastically, grateful for any edge against the cold. On the journey back to the ship, you reflect on how many explorers owe their lives to Inuit generosity. Yet in the history books, that part is often glossed over in favor of heroic narratives about conquering the poles. Sure, some accounts pay homage to local guides, but rarely is the full debt acknowledged. Standing here, your boots squeaking against the crisp snow, you feel the stark truth. No European expedition could truly conquer this land without learning from those who call it home. Your breath comes in shallow puffs, the icy wind biting at your cheeks. It's been a long day, and your body reminds you of the countless steps you've walked over uneven ice. But the wariness is tempered by a sense of awe and respect. As you crest a small ridge and see your ship's masts poking above the floes, you carry a renewed appreciation for the people who've thrived here for centuries. You wonder if, somewhere, the Inuit are shaking their heads, bemused at your jam obsession, but perhaps glad you've shared a taste of something new. When you finally climb aboard, someone asks how it went. You can only grin and say, "I think I just found the real Arctic experts." Tomorrow, you might incorporate some of their techniques. Maybe relacing your boots or layering furs the way they showed you. And if the morning brings more jam on your biscuit, you'll remember the laughter in that igloo as the children tasted something sweet for the very first time. The next morning, the crackle of activity on deck has a different energy. Whispers fly about a nearby expedition, another ship braving the ice. You can almost taste the electric jolt of rivalry in the air. The idea that you're not the only ones forging ahead pushes everyone to move faster, as if you're all part of some grand, unspoken competition to claim the farthest point north. For the first time in weeks, there's a rush of urgency that goes beyond mere survival. Word spreads that the newly sighted vessel might be flying a foreign flag. Some say American, others insist it's French. A few claim it's just another British expedition, but with different sponsors. Whatever the truth, there's a flurry of speculation below deck. Are they better equipped? Do they have special provisions? More advanced gear? The jam suddenly becomes a symbol of your own ship's readiness. You even overhear one officer muttering, "They won't have a chance against our sugar-laced rations." There's something comical about framing jam as a competitive advantage, but in a world where every caloric boost matters, it's not entirely absurd. When you poke your head out onto the ice, you spot a tall figure in the distance, pacing near a smaller vessel's hull. Through your spyglass, you glimpse a cluster of men hauling crates. You can't see the flag clearly, but the scene is enough to make you aware the Arctic, vast as it is, can feel crowded when another ship appears. Suddenly, you're in the midst of what some call the Great Race, the scramble among nations to plant their flags on the highest latitudes, to discover new passages, and to secure bragging rights back home. A mainstream historical fact underscores the stakes. By the mid to late 19th century, governments and aristocratic societies offered hefty rewards for explorers who charted unknown coasts or found navigable routes through the ice. In Britain, for instance, the Admiralty poured resources into polar missions, hoping to find the fabled Northwest Passage. Other nations, seeking prestige trade routes or scientific glory, soon jumped in. It became a sort of global chess match, with each expedition inching forward in ice-choked channels. As the day unfolds, you learn that the crew on the nearby ship has also heard of your presence. One of your scouts waves a makeshift white flag from a ridge, signaling a willingness to parley. A small group from their side and yours meet on relatively stable ice to exchange pleasantries, and of course, to size each other up. You can't resist eavesdropping, straining to hear any mention of their provisions. There's a pang of satisfaction when someone casually mentions, "We're well stocked with fruit preserves." A quick glance reveals a flicker of surprise on the rival captain's face. Maybe didn't expect that. Joke number 1 slips into your thoughts. Never underestimate a ship armed with jam. The corners of your mouth twitch in amusement as you picture a line of uniformed sailors, each wielding a spoon like a bayonet. The conversation remains polite, but an undercurrent of one-upmanship runs beneath every word. One of their officers brags about a newly invented steam heating system. Another drops hints that they carry special, enhanced rations, possibly laced with extra sugar or coffee. You realize that, just as your ship thinks jam is a secret weapon, they might have their own sugary ace up their sleeve. Historians still argue whether these national rivalries genuinely advanced polar science, or if they primarily wasted resources in pursuit of pride. On the one hand, competition spurred innovation, better ships, improved ration preservation, and more sophisticated navigational tools. On the other hand, many voyages ended in tragedy or vanished into the white void, leaving behind empty coffers and grieving families. The debate lingers in academic circles, particularly when discussing the moral cost of sending so many into harm's way. After the brief rendezvous on the ice, both teams retreat to their ships. You climb aboard with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Part of you feels a surge of competitive spirit, like you've been handed a reason to push harder. Another part wonders why it matters who plants a flag where, especially in a place as hostile as this. Yet a sense of camaraderie persists. You're all explorers facing the same dangers. If one side's ship were in peril, would the other rush to help? Probably. Despite the rivalry, survival trumps national pride out here. Still, you can't escape the race's gravitational pull. Plans shift. Your captain gathers everyone and outlines a more aggressive route. The ice might be trickier, but the reward could be greater if you outmaneuver the other expedition. You're told to stay alert for any navigable leads. As you bundle up for a reconnaissance trip, you secretly wonder how much jam you can stuff into your pockets in case you need a quick energy boost. Before you depart, a sailor slaps your shoulder and jokes, "If we run out of ammunition, we can always sling jam at them." Joke number 2. You both laugh, even though you know it's not a real threat. On your scouting trek, you're struck by how the Arctic's stark beauty can overshadow the petty competition. Ice fields stretch in every direction, shimmering beneath a sun that scarcely rises above the horizon. You catch glimpses of distant mountain ridges, their snow-capped peaks tinted pink by the feeble light. But each time your mind drifts to wonder, you're reeled back by the memory that another crew is out here, too, scanning for the same leads, mapping the same labyrinth of frozen seas. A few hours later, you stumble upon an area where the ice pack looks thinner. Carefully, you test its stability with a long pole. It cracks ominously, but not enough to deter you from investigating further. You sketch a rough diagram in your notebook, marking potential channels. If you can navigate this stretch, it might let your ship slip ahead by several days' journey. You hurry back, excitement fizzing in your stomach. When you relay the findings to the captain, his eyes light up. Immediately, orders are given to steer the ship toward this newly discovered route. In the flurry of preparations, men haul ropes, shift crates of supplies, including, of course, jam, and adjust the sails to catch a favorable wind. If such a thing exists in these latitudes, it's as though someone rang a starting bell. The crew's vigor is palpable. Even the bitter cold and biting wind can't extinguish their sense of purpose. Yet, as you look around, you notice the strain. People move with hurried steps, and tempers flare at minor slights. Competition can be corrosive. You realize some of your comrades haven't slept enough, still too wired by the thought of beating the other expedition. Over dinner, which again features jam, slathered biscuits, you overhear an anxious whisper. "If we don't reach open water soon, we'll get pinned by the pack ice for another season." The Arctic doesn't care about your race, it sets its own timetable. You recall a quirky tidbit from your reading. One expedition in the 1840s carried a giant banner, emblazoned with their sponsor's name, hoping to plant it at the magnetic North Pole. They never succeeded. Pack ice trapped them, and they ended up stashing the banner in a snowbank, presumably to lighten their sledge load. Future expeditions found the tattered cloth months later, flapping in the wind. The sponsor's grand gesture became a windsock for Arctic foxes. Joke number 3 sneaks into your thoughts. Maybe we should unfurl a jam-themed banner. At least the foxes would appreciate the design. You can't help but grin, even though you know how serious these journeys can be. As the ship creeps forward, you keep glancing at the horizon, half expecting to see the silhouette of the rival vessel trailing behind. Are they following the same lead, or do they have their own secret channel? You sense the tension coiling in your gut, the same tension that's gripping everyone. Even the clinking of spoons in jam jars sounds a bit more frenetic. In the quiet moments, you wonder if the best outcome might be a collaborative one. 2 crews pooling resources and knowledge to survive this harsh domain. But you also understand human nature, the thirst for glory, the dream of being first. It's as addictive as the sugar surging through your veins when you devour another spoonful of preserves. Eventually, the day wanes and a pale twilight washes over the ice. Work slows, and the crew retreats below deck. As you lie in your bunk, listening to the Arctic wind batter the hull, you think about the great race. Tomorrow, you'll either gain some ground or find yourself locked in by the shifting flows. Either way, the jam crates will be there, fueling your journey, sweetening your spirits, even when the competition grows bitter. The evening settles over the ship like a weary sigh, and you find yourself below deck, eyes adjusting to the dim lantern light. All around you, the hull creaks softly in the cold. Someone just finished brewing tea laced with a dash of jam. You can smell the sweet fruit mingling with the faint odor of smoke and damp wool. With daylight waning, and the route ahead uncertain, it feels like the right time to revisit the crew's journals. After all, there's a certain solace in seeing your own trials reflected on paper. You settle onto a wooden crate and flip open a small, leather-bound notebook. On the first page, the name of a shipmate who joined the expedition from Liverpool is scribbled in a shaky hand. The initial entries are full of optimism, daydreams of fame, curiosity about Arctic wildlife, even whimsical notes about how this jam ration is the best part of the day. But as you skim further, the tone shifts. He describes numb fingers, endless nights, and gnawing homesickness. His scrawl grows messier, punctuation scarcer, as if fatigue has seeped into every stroke of ink. You pause at a stained page, dark splotches that might be spilled tea or perhaps jam. The passage reads, "The ice shifts incessantly, no sign of release. If not for these sweet preserves, I'd forget what kindness tastes like." You can practically hear his trembling voice, the words etched in desperation. A chill crawls up your spine, but it's not entirely from the cold. You felt that same bleakness creeping around the edges of your own thoughts. At the back of the journal, a note, "I keep a spare jar at my bunk. Call it my reserve of hope." The phrase tugs at your heart. Hope in a jar, literal and metaphorical. One mainstream historical fact leaps to mind: many 19th century explorers, faced with relentless darkness during polar winters, turned to small comforts, like jam or tobacco, to stave off despair. Official directives from naval authorities might emphasize discipline, but diaries often reveal how crucial these personal treats were for mental survival. You tuck the notebook away, rising to pace the narrow corridor. Lanterns flicker, casting tall shadows on the walls. A few steps beyond, you notice another diary, this one bulkier, bound with twine. You pick it up, brushing off a fine layer of ice crystals that somehow made their way below deck. Its pages are dense with sketches and charts, interspersed with paragraphs detailing daily life. Each day's entry ends with a rating of how palatable the rations were. You can't help but smile. Jam consistently scores a 9 or 10, while salted meat hovers around a disappointing 4. Joke number 1 emerges in your mind. We should start a culinary guide. Gourmet jam dining in the Arctic, a 10-star experience. You'd sell maybe 5 copies in total, but hey, every expedition would probably grab one. As you skim more entries, you discover references to sightings in aurora so bright that it lit the ice like midday, a mysterious driftwood log that floated by, leading to speculation about land not too far away, and tales of polar bear tracks circling the ship at night. Another section discusses the rival expedition glimpsed recently, how their presence both kindles a competitive spark and provokes deep unease. The diarist wonders aloud if we'll race toward glory or entrapment, the sentence trailing off as if the writer can't decide which outcome is more likely. You find a quirky tidbit in the margins. A sailor claims he tried mixing jam with melted snow, then freezing it again to make a rudimentary Arctic sorbet. He complains that it took forever to freeze correctly in the sub-zero wind. Ironically enough, perhaps the swirling gusts prevented the mixture from settling. The final verdict was that it tasted like sweet slush, but apparently it offered a fleeting illusion of summer treats. You stifle a laugh, picturing someone huddled on deck, spooning half-frozen jam snow out of a tin cup. Joke number 2. I'll open an ice cream parlor, only 99.9% guaranteed to freeze your tongue solid. Eventually, you come across a set of weather logs sandwiched between personal reflections. Each day's temperature reading is accompanied by notes on morale, slight improvement in mood when jam ration doubled, or despondence high as we near scurvy territory, jam supply stable. It's a stark, almost scientific correlation. The lower the morale, the more jam is referenced. Historians still argue whether these diaries provide conclusive evidence of jam's morale-boosting effect, or if it merely underscores how desperate explorers were for any reprieve. Did the sugar truly lighten spirits, or was the placebo effect at play? Perhaps both. This debate circles through academic papers even now. You slip past another crewman who's rummaging in a storage closet. He notices the pile of journals in your arms. With a knowing smile, he confides that he keeps his own diary, though he's quick to add it's more scribbled jokes than scientific data. His favorite anecdote so far is about the time someone mistook a jar of gooseberry jam for pistachio pudding. Never seen a man so disappointed, he says with a chuckle. That's joke number 3. In a small alcove, you spot a chest labeled Ship's Records. You lift the lid, half expecting to find official ledgers. Instead, you discover yet another diary, its leather cover cracked with age. You open it gingerly, scanning the first lines. Day hunting, setting sail with heads high and hearts full. If only we could bottle this feeling as neatly as jam. The next few pages reflect optimism, glorious plans for charting new passages. But soon reality intrudes. The script grows shaky, the mood somber. It's a chronicle of near collisions with icebergs, of crew members succumbing to frostbite, and inevitably references to jam as the highlight of each major meal. By the time you close the book, a lump forms in your throat. These diaries feel like confessions whispered into the dark. You sense the weight of so many hopes pinned on the improbable success of Arctic exploration. For every line proclaiming wonder at the world's northern reaches, there's another lamenting the cost in human suffering. Sometimes it's just the small mention. At least we have jam today. That hints at how fragile morale can be. Tucking the diaries under your arm, you climb onto the main deck, where the night sky sprawls overhead, studded with stars. A hush blankets the ship. Most of your companions are either asleep or staring into the distance, lost in private thoughts. You make your way to the railing, gazing at ice floes that gleam faintly in the moonlight. The air is so cold, your lungs feel like they're shrinking. But you find strength in remembering those who came before you, scrawling words of determination into diaries that might never see the light of day. Their hardships echo yours, the daily grind of fighting off frostbite, the creeping dread of potentially never returning home, and the curious comfort of a spoonful of jam. You look down at the ice again, and for a moment, you imagine the diaries like small lanterns in the night, each entry a flicker of hope, a fragile flame against the Arctic's endless twilight. Another wave of determination surges through you. Yes, the path ahead remains uncertain. Yes, the cold seeps into every joint. But in your hands you hold proof that humans have always sought optimism in the face of impossible odds, one page at a time, one sweet taste at a time. You step out onto the deck as morning light creeps over the horizon, painting the ice in hushed tones of silver and blue. The cold immediately hits you, forcing you to squint and brace yourself against the wind. You think you've grown accustomed to it, but the Arctic always finds a way to remind you who's in charge. Your breath turns to wispy clouds while the boards beneath your feet groan, as if complaining about another day in this endless freeze. Somebody mentions the name Franklin in passing, and you can almost feel a collective hush fall over the crew. Sir John Franklin's doomed 1845 expedition stands as the shadow that looms over all Arctic voyages. You've heard bits and pieces. 2 ships, Erebus and Terror, both vanishing into the ice, leaving behind scarcely more than scraps of evidence and a legacy of speculation. Even now, decades later, their story sparks a grim fascination. You find yourself leaning against the railing, recalling a conversation with an older sailor who was borderline obsessive about the Franklin tale. He claimed that jam played a weirdly symbolic role in that tragedy. At first, you couldn't see how fruit preserves could factor into such a catastrophe. But he insisted that, to men starved of fresh food, jam was a double-edged sword, sweet solace on the one hand, and a possible false promise of proper nutrition on the other. Historians still argue whether poor food preservation contributed directly to Franklin's crew succumbing to scurvy, lead poisoning, or both. You remember reading how some of their tin provisions were sealed with lead solder, potentially contaminating the contents over time. One mainstream historical fact is that extensive lead residues were found in the remains of crew members when they were later exhumed. The official logs mention jars of jam among the stores, but no one's certain if those preserves were also compromised. Time and ice have obscured the details. In your mind, you picture those two proud ships cutting through Arctic waters, loaded with enough supplies to last years, including copious amounts of tinned and jarred foods. The British Admiralty had every reason to believe Franklin would succeed in charting the final link of the Northwest Passage. Instead, the mission dissolved into mystery and heartbreak, with search parties finding scattered bones, battered lifeboats, and cryptic artifacts, yet no survivors. The role of jam in that saga might seem trivial at first glance, but it's often the small details that paint the most haunting picture. You recall a story that the searchers discovered a deserted camp with smashed tin cans and a few shattered jars, possibly jam, frozen into the ground. It's the kind of image that lingers, a sweet treat turned useless relic in a place that devours hope. Joke number 1 bubbles up. We all joke that jam can fix anything out here, except, apparently, entire expeditions. You grimace, feeling the weight of such a bleak reflection. As you ready yourself for the day's tasks, a gust of wind rattles the rigging, and you catch sight of your own jam crates stacked neatly below deck. It's almost impossible not to think about how precarious your situation could be if you were to lose anchor in this frozen desert. At least your jars aren't sealed with lead, you remind yourself. A small comfort. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some enthusiasts of polar history suggest that certain jam varieties, especially blackcurrant, retain more vitamin C if they're not overcooked. If only Franklin's expedition had known precisely which fruits to preserve and how carefully to boil them, perhaps they would have stood a better chance against scurvy. Then again, lead poisoning might have sealed their fate regardless. The Arctic seldom cares about your best laid plans. Midday, you and a small team venture out onto a nearby ice floe to survey the thickness. You're instructed to watch for any leads or cracks that could hint at open water beyond. While you work, you swap Franklin tales, half to pass the time, half to remind yourselves of the stakes. One of your crewmates, breath steaming in the wind, says he read a theory about cannibalism among Franklin's men, citing blade marks on recovered bones. You feel your stomach twist. It's an appalling possibility, but the Arctic can drive people to horrors you'd never imagine. Still, you manage to crack a second joke to break the tension. One might be desperate, but let's all agree not to eat each other. That's what the jam's for. Your friend snorts, but the laughter is short-lived. The cold seeps in, and the polar silence feels uncomfortably like an echo of those long-ago tragedies. Back on the ship, the captain orders a review of your own rations. You're relieved to see the jam stocks still robust and free of suspicious sealing techniques. That said, you notice some metal cans of meat have started to rust along the seams, and a few tinned vegetables look dubious. It's a stark reminder that you're not immune to the same pitfalls that claimed so many. The quartermaster makes a note to inspect everything more thoroughly. Over dinner, conversation inevitably circles back to Franklin. One officer remarks on the irony. Franklin was hailed as the most experienced Arctic explorer of his time, and yet the ice claimed him anyway. Another muses that maybe the success or failure of an expedition is often more luck than skill. You find yourself swirling a spoonful of jam into your tea, ruminating on how easily your own story could mirror theirs. Historians have long debated the Franklin expedition's downfall. Was it purely the ice locking them in? Did scurvy, starvation, and lead, poisoned mines drive them to abandon ship? Or were they undone by a combination of arrogance and untested technology? The diaries recovered were partial, and evidence was scattered. Even more perplexing are some half-finished notes that mention salvage attempts, as if the crew tried to lighten the ships by discarding heavy items. You wonder if jam survived that cull. Some accounts suggest so, but there's no consensus. Joke number 3 appears almost involuntarily. Imagine having to choose between tossing jam or your prized piano overboard to lighten the ship. You envision the crew debating which is more critical for morale, sweet preserves or music. Morbid humor, perhaps, but out here, you grab levity where you can. Late that evening, a biting wind drives everyone below deck. You huddle near a lantern, flipping through a battered volume that includes transcribed letters from Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, beseeching anyone who might have clues about her husband's fate. Her words are heartbreakingly earnest, filled with longing for answers. It's sobering to read them in your cramped bunk. Jam jar at your side. You feel the hull tremble as the ice shifts outside. If the gloom of winter sets in fully, you risk becoming just another footnote in the Arctic's ledger. Exhaustion tugs at your eyelids, but you fight it for a moment, recalling a final detail about Franklin. The name of his flagship was Erebus, also the name of a region in Greek mythology's underworld. You shiver at the chilling coincidence. You blow out the lantern. Darkness envelops you, and you can almost sense the presence of Franklin's ghostly armada drifting through the ice, still searching for a passage that remains elusive. At least you have some advantages: they didn't. Slightly better technology, more awareness of the Arctic's capricious nature, and jam that's hopefully not laced with lead. Whether that's enough to tip the scale in your favor is anyone's guess. Closing your eyes, you cling to the thin thread of warmth and optimism that jam can offer. Tomorrow you'll rise and continue the search for open water, aware that each decision could steer you closer to success, or consign you to the same frozen legend that befell Franklin. In this realm of ice, the difference between tragedy and triumph often rests on the smallest of details, even something as ordinary as a jar of sticky preserves. The next few days pass in an anxious blur as you sail through fields of broken ice. The ship lurches and creaks, its timbers bowing against the pressure of shifting floes. Your fingers remain numb despite your thick gloves, and a constant wind hisses through every gap in the planks. Still, a hushed excitement lingers among the crew. Rumors swirl that relief ships are on their way, ships laden with fresh supplies, medical gear, and of course, jam. Word arrives by way of a passing whaler, a squadron of smaller vessels recently left port, heading north with the intention of rescuing stranded expeditions, yours included if necessary. At first, no one quite believes it. The Arctic rarely tolerates multiple ships converging in one place without a mishap or two. But slowly, the whispers solidify into something like hope. You sense a new urgency in how the crew goes about daily tasks, scraping ice off the hull, repairing battered sails, making sure no item of importance is left behind. If rescue is possible, you want to be in the best condition to receive it. You remember hearing a mainstream historical fact. Multiple times throughout the 19th century, the Royal Navies and other nations dispatched relief missions when ships failed to return on schedule. These missions often carried extra rations: jam, flour, salted meat, to sustain any marooned explorers they might find. But these rescue efforts came with their own hazards. Some ended up trapped, just like the expeditions they aimed to save, creating a domino effect of stranded crews scattered across the ice. One bitter morning, as you scan the horizon with a spyglass, you spot something moving among the floes. The shape is distant, a mast, perhaps, or a funnel of steam. Could it be one of those relief ships, forging its way to your position? Your pulse quickens, and you notify the watch officer. Soon, half the crew has abandoned their chores to take a look. Sure enough, a dark silhouette emerges against the pallid skyline. A modest vessel, smaller than yours, its rigging battered by frost. Within the hour, the ship closes in. Signals are exchanged, flags wagging in the icy wind, and eventually a few of its sailors venture across the ice toward you. Their breath is visible with each exhalation, and they appear just as worn by the cold as you are. You muster a grin, though your lips crack in the chill. One of them raises a hand in greeting, stumbling over a greeting in your language. You gather around on the deck, offering mugs of steaming tea laced with jam. Your visitors accept, and a flicker of relief crosses their faces as they sip. They bring news of an even larger relief vessel lagging behind, one that carries crates upon crates of fresh stores. It's not just jam, it's also extra coal, medicines, and some fresh produce packed in ice. But everyone fixates on the jam, partly because it's the easiest to distribute. Another man beams as he describes how the next wave of ships plans to stow barrels of jam among the deck cargo for swift unloading. Joke number one surfaces as you picture a battered steamer plowing through the ice, its deck bristling with nothing but jam barrels. If that ship hits an iceberg, at least we'll have the world's largest fruit slushy. A tired chuckle ripples among the group. Your own captain exchanges details with the newcomers' positions of open leads, potential wintering spots, how your supplies hold out. Once they learn about your jam reserves, they nod in approval, noting that sugar is precisely what exhausted sailors need when the body's energy starts flagging. Still, the relief ships carry jam for others. Explorers who might have run dangerously low or who never thought to pack such a large quantity in the first place. The visitors also recount a story of stumbling upon a smaller crew stranded on an ice floe miles away. They'd been forced to abandon their vessel when the hull cracked under pressure. Quirky tidbit, apparently. That desperate party fashioned a makeshift raft out of leftover barrels, yes, jam barrels among them, to reach sturdier ice. They credited those jam barrels with saving their lives, both as flotation devices and as a quick source of calories. It's the sort of tale you'd dismiss as tall if you weren't in the Arctic, where reality often outstrips imagination. Even with rescue on the horizon, caution dominates. This region is notorious for shifting ice conditions that can trap or crush unwary ships. Historians still argue whether the Royal Navy's approach, sending large relief fleets year after year, was prudent or reckless. Some claim it reflected true humanitarian commitment. Others say it wasted resources on ill-conceived missions. Whichever side you take, you're just glad you're not alone out here anymore. Before parting ways, you offer your new friends a hot meal in the ship's galley. The conversation flows easier now, buoyed by renewed spirits. You swap stories of polar bears creeping around camp, of gear freezing solid overnight, and, inevitably, of jam. One of the relief sailors jokes that if he never sees another jar of jam again once he's home, it'll be too soon. But out here, he wouldn't trade it for anything. Joke number 2. Later, you venture onto the ice with a small team to retrieve a special care package from the relief ship's sled. The wind roars, forcing you to crouch low while you drag crates over the frozen terrain. Your throat burns with each breath, but you persist, fueled by the knowledge that these crates might contain life-saving provisions. When you finally hoist one open, you nearly sob at the sight of fresh fruit and vegetables packed in straw. Carrots, apples, even a few onions. They're partly frostbitten, but they look like treasures from another world. And then there's the jam, a whole new stash. It's carefully sealed, each jar wrapped in cloth to reduce the risk of breakage in transit. You glance at the labels: apricot, cherry, blackcurrant, a rainbow of flavors. An odd sense of reverence fills you, as if you're holding precious relics in your mittened hands. Another comedic thought forms, joke number 3, as you wonder whether you could open a gourmet jam shop in London, selling each jar with a dramatic story of its Arctic journey. By the time you haul the crates back to the ship, your limbs feel like lead. But the mood among the crew has brightened noticeably. People help unload in near silence, their eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and relief. Once stowed below deck, these supplies offer a small guarantee against the long nights ahead. That evening, a dinner of salted meat transforms into a makeshift feast when the cook produces a jar of brand new apricot jam. The crew roars with approval, spooning it onto biscuits, mixing it into hot tea, or simply devouring it straight. In the flicker of lantern light, you see men leaning back, almost smiling, as if for a moment they can pretend they're home, safe by a fireplace. Still, you understand the rescue and relief effort is no magic wand. The ice can shift unpredictably, and the storms can fling even the best prepared ship off course. But for the first time in a long while, you sense a tangible path forward. The presence of relief ships means coordinated support, a network of watchers scanning the ice for stranded parties, and more frequent scouting missions to find reliable routes. Before you retire, you walk the deck, gazing at the endless expanse of white and silver. Your breath steams in front of you, and your shoulders ache from hauling crates. Yet your heart feels lighter. In the pocket of your coat, you carry a small jar, cherry jam. You haven't cracked the seal yet, saving it like a good luck charm. Maybe you'll open it once you're truly safe. Or maybe you'll carry it to the next encampment, where men might need that burst of sweetness more than you do. For now, you pause, leaning against the icy railing. The relief ships are out there, forging ahead through the darkness, carrying supplies to those who might be just a day away from giving up hope. Your own crew stands stronger for having encountered them. And through it all, Jam remains the unassuming hero, stocked and ready to offer warmth and energy in a landscape that demands every drop of resolve you can muster. The next time you catch sight of open water, it feels almost unreal, like spotting a phantom oasis in the desert. Sheets of ice still flank you on every side, but a broad swath of dark ocean gleams in the distance, lapping at the flows. The wind seems to shift, carrying the salty tang of the sea rather than just the sterile bite of ice. You're not sure if it's your imagination, but the air tastes different, a subtle promise that maybe you won't be bound to this frozen realm forever. You stand at the bow transfixed, barely noticing the ship's constant tremors beneath your feet. Then a voice breaks through the hush. If it's really open water, we might be able to sail closer and map that stretch before the pack returns. The excitement is contagious and everyone scrambles into action. The captain paces with renewed vigor, the navigator studies charts and compares them to notes from recent scouting treks. Talk of glory sparks again. Could this be the breakthrough everyone craves? Yet no one forgets the countless near misses leading up to this moment. Ice can shift at any time, snuffing out the path like a door slammed shut. Even if you reach open water, that doesn't guarantee you found a route home. Or anywhere, really. Historians still argue whether these partial openings were false hope or stepping stones to the Northwest Passage. Some expeditions found half-open channels that led nowhere, costing valuable time. Others plowed ahead, only to be locked in again once temperatures plummeted. But you cling to optimism. As the crew hoists sails and prepares for maneuvering, a wave of anticipation ripples through you. People tie down loose items, check the rudder, and secure the precious crates of jam below deck. Over the last few weeks, those crates have dwindled, but a fresh stock from the relief ships stands in neat rows, gleaming with promise. One of your mates quips, "If we catch a real break, we'll christen this channel Jam Strait." Joke number 1. You can't help but laugh at the ridiculous idea of a big official chart labeling some Arctic waterway after fruit preserves. The wind is temperamental, gusting in fits. In one moment, it helps nudge the ship forward. In the next, it howls head-on, forcing the sails to snap and flap like agitated wings. A few sailors curse under their breath as they wrestle the ropes, trying to keep the vessel aligned with the open channel. You brace yourself against the railing, eyes squinting in the glare. For a moment, the hull glides smoothly between ice floes, giving you a rush of exhilaration. But an abrupt jolt rattles the deck, an underwater chunk of ice scraping the planks. Everyone goes rigid, hands gripping whatever they can for stability. The scraping subsides, but the scare reminds you of how easily this opportunity can vanish. You take a deep breath, forcing yourself to stay calm. This is the Arctic's trademark possibility and peril, side by side. Eventually, you break into a stretch of clearer water. It's not exactly wide open. Ice lurks on the periphery, a looming threat. But for now, you can feel the ship's hull gliding on liquid rather than grinding through slush. The relief is palpable. You spot a few crew members smiling in disbelief. One even raises a ladle of jam like a celebratory toast.
Joke number 2. To the sea! May our jam never freeze again!
By midday, the sun hangs low, casting a muted glow across the horizon. You scan the distance with a spyglass, vainly hoping to see land. Instead, you find only a boundary of pale blue ice that seems to stretch forever. Still, you keep watching, half suspecting another vessel might lurk out there, also racing to exploit this navigable gap. The rivalry from before feels distant now. Any crew that finds a sustainable route could go down in history. But in a place like this, survival matters more than first place. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind during the height of Arctic exploration fever. Nations threw themselves into ever more ambitious voyages, each hoping to be the one that finally unlocked the passage. But the ocean's changing conditions meant that a route could open one year and seal off the next. Maps based on a successful voyage might become useless within a season. Some labeled the Arctic the graveyard of ambition. You wonder if that's still true. Despite the hopeful water you're currently sailing, evening closes in fast. Clouds pile high, tinged with purple and grey, and the temperature nosedives. As you lower sails and prepare to anchor for the night, there's a flurry of activity around the galley. People shuffle below deck, lured by the promise of hot food. You make your way there, shedding your thick coat the moment you feel the faint warmth from the stove. On a table, jars of jam sit lined up, blackcurrant, strawberry, and even a jar of peach from the relief shipment. As you pick a seat, your stomach grumbles. The day's tension left you ravenous. Dinner is simple, salted fish, some stale bread, and a ladle of stew. But there's a hush when someone cracks open the peach jam. A wave of sweet aroma floods the room. The crew murmurs in amazement, as if they're unveiling a prized artifact. You spread a small scoop on your bread and take a bite, savoring the luscious, sunny flavor. For a brief second, you could swear you're back in a warm orchard instead of this frozen tundra. You recall a quirky tidbit some 19th century explorers wrote that the taste of fresh or rare jam could trigger vivid memories of home, uplifting spirits for days. Their diaries mention how a spoonful of something sweet could revive dormant sentiments. A mother's kitchen, a summer garden, a childhood picnic. It's another reminder that travel isn't just about distance. It's about how your senses tie you to the life you left behind. Historians still argue whether morale boosters like jam genuinely improved an expedition's odds of success, or if they merely masked the underlying hardships. After all, no amount of sugar can thaw a glacier or fix a broken mast. But you can't deny that your own spirits feel buoyed right now. The jam tastes like hope. Not long after you finish eating, the wind outside picks up. You hear it whistling around the ship's hull, rattling every beam. Someone makes a third joke, albeit a tense one. The Arctic must have heard we found open water and wants to seal it up again. There's a smattering of humorless chuckles. You know all too well that a storm could push the ice back, barricading your path by morning. You decide to join the deck watch, partly out of restlessness. Pulling on your gear once again, you climb up to find the sky a swirling canvas of snow and dusk. The open channel is still there, but the floes on either side look closer, as though they've crept in while you were below. You stand near the bow, listening to the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. It's a sound both comforting and foreboding, proof that you've found water, but also a reminder that it can vanish overnight. Eventually, your shift ends, and you retreat below deck. Slumping onto a small bench, you reflect on how close you are to a breakthrough. One more day of favorable conditions might let you push further, maybe reach a zone where ice thins out permanently. Or you could wake up locked in again, forced to wait for another fleeting chance. That's the Arctic gamble. Equal parts determination and concession to fate. As you drift off, you recall a conversation you had days ago about the prospect of finding a water route. Someone posited that jam is the real hero, fueling the crew's last-ditch efforts. You smile at the memory, a silly notion, but it doesn't feel completely off base. In an environment where everything conspires to wear you down, a bit of sweetness can indeed feel heroic. When you awaken, a hush blankets the ship. You edge onto the deck, expecting to see yesterday's tenuous channel choked with ice, but to your astonishment, it remains open, perhaps even wider than before. Broken shards of ice drift aimlessly, leaving a ragged path of dark water that leads farther into the horizon. You can feel a shared, cautious excitement in the air, as though everyone is holding their breath, afraid that even a whisper might jinx your good fortune. Orders come briskly. Sails unfurl, ropes tighten, and the ship nudges forward with a creak of timber. You squint at the sunlight glinting off the floes, each movement a careful dance of navigation. A stiff wind whips across the deck, but it's not unfriendly. It seems to be pushing you in the direction you want to go. The cold still gnaws at your bones, yet the mood is lighter than it's been in weeks. Someone hauls a small barrel on deck, one of the new arrivals from the relief ships, and cracks the lid to reveal extra stores of jam. The crew murmurs appreciatively. Between shifts at the rigging, sailors sneak spoonfuls as if tapping into a secret reservoir of bravery. Joke number one resonates when a voice pipes up. This ship's running on jam fumes and wishful thinking. You can't help but agree. Every sense is on high alert, scanning for signs of ice closing in. But hour by hour, the passage remains open, offering the heady thrill of real progress. You stand at the bow, wind stinging your cheeks, eyes watering from the brightness reflected by the water. A wave of gratitude swells in your chest. Could this be the break you've chased all season, a genuine route through the Arctic maze? Historians still argue whether any one expedition can claim discovering the Northwest Passage, or if it's an ever-shifting puzzle that no single voyage can conquer. All you know is that, right now, you're moving, gliding over open sea where you once thought only ice would be. By noon, the ship picks up speed. You notice chunks of ice bobbing against the hull, but they're no longer large enough to pose a significant threat. The captain paces with a mixture of apprehension and excitement, checking charts and conferring with the navigator. You overhear snippets. We'll map as we go. Keep a close watch. Be ready to pull back if it freezes. But none of these cautionary words dampen your optimism. Even the pale sun feels friendlier, as if it's blessing your journey with a few extra rays. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Many explorers in the 19th century reported that certain stretches of Arctic water would sometimes remain ice, free for short windows, thanks to shifting currents or relatively warmer temperatures. Crews that happened to be in the right place at the right time could press forward miles beyond what others managed. Were you simply fortunate? Or is this a reward for your relentless persistence, bolstered by jam-fueled endurance? Around mid-afternoon, the wind shifts again, gusting in from the north. The temperature plummets, and you catch sight of ominous clouds gathering. Crew members exchange uneasy glances. The Arctic's mood can change without warning, and a sudden storm could turn these waters treacherous. Still, you push on. You've come too far to let a bit of weather send you scurrying back to the ice. Down in the galley, the atmosphere is tense yet electric. People whisper about how close you might be to a significant breakthrough, while others fear you'll simply find another barrier of pack ice beyond the next bend. The cook tries to break the tension by serving yet another jam, laced meal, biscuits drizzled with a blend of strawberry and peach preserves. The crew digs in, grateful for the sugar rush. Joke number 2 emerges when someone calls it victory glaze. Back on deck, you notice the clouds have thickened. Snow flurries swirl and visibility shrinks. The captain orders a reduction in sail to maneuver more cautiously. Your heart clenches at the possibility that you could lose the path in the gathering haze. For a solid hour, you inch forward at a snail's pace. The wind roars, ice scrapes along the hull, and every command is shouted over the tumult. You're beginning to think this might be the end of your open water advantage. But then the storm abates as quickly as it arrived. The flurries ease, unveiling a corridor of water that stretches farther than you dared hope. Relief and exhilaration surge through the crew. You exchange grins with those around you, some of whom look like they might burst into laughter or tears, maybe both. You can't resist a third joke, murmuring under your breath, "At least the storm didn't steal our jam." Word spreads of a faint shoreline on the horizon, possibly the edge of a previously uncharted coast. If it's true, you might establish a new map reference. Another small but meaningful contribution to Arctic exploration. The navigator hovers near the bow, glass pressed to his eye, muttering excitedly about landmasses, latitude, and geological formations. You sense the magnitude real land means potential shelter, resources, and another step in unveiling the Arctic's mysteries. The ship plows on. You watch that sliver of coastline grow ever so slightly more distinct, and you can't help but wonder what future historians will write about this day. Will they say your ship found a crucial link in the labyrinth of northern seas, or was it just another partial discovery overshadowed by larger triumphs? Either way, it doesn't diminish the immediate joy. You feel the pressure in your chest ease, replaced by a calm you haven't felt since the journey began. The sun dips low, painting the ice fragments and swirling water in purples and oranges. You linger at the railing, listening to the slap of waves, tasting salt on the air. Someone passes you a mug of tea, sweetened, naturally, with jam. As you sip, you marvel at how something so simple became the cornerstone of your morale, a sugary lifeline through countless trials. Night descends, but the path ahead remains clear for now. You wonder if you'll anchor soon to rest, or keep pressing forward by starlight. Either choice feels monumental, a sign that you've reached a turning point in your expedition. Below deck, you hear the muffled bustle of the crew settling into whatever routine they can manage. The Arctic's challenges aren't over. Far from it. But this opening might be the glimpse of a better tomorrow, one where survival morphs into genuine exploration and success. In your bunk later, you stare at the timber beams overhead. The creak of the hull feels almost soothing, as if the ship itself is proud of today's progress. You close your eyes, imagining the map you'll draw, tracing the line of this open channel that defied all odds. Whether history names it or forgets it, you'll remember each league of water, each chunk of ice you dodged, each spoonful of jam that kept you going. The 300-word wind, down and now, with the day's work done and your thoughts drifting in the gentle sway of the ship, let's slip softly into a slower, quieter rhythm. Allow the echoes of the Arctic winds to fade into a distant hush, as your mind settles on the calm that comes after so many hours of labor and wonder. Your body feels heavy, yet comforted, by the knowledge that you've journeyed through a place both majestic and unyielding, a realm that has tested your resolve and offered quiet gifts in return. Feel the gentle pull of sleep tugging at your eyelids, coaxing you to rest in the same embrace that cradles the ship in calm waters. The faint creak of timber and the soft whisper of a breeze through the sails remind you that you're safe here, carried by a vessel that has become your floating refuge. In this stillness, each breath feels deeper, each heartbeat steadier, as though you're becoming part of the soothing nocturnal rhythm. Remember the shimmering ice fields, the pale sun brushing the horizon, and the sweet taste of jam on your tongue, a small delight that melts the cold and feeds your spirit. Let these images fill your thoughts like a quiet lullaby, weaving comfort and warmth through every corner of your mind. You have seen hardships, but you have also felt triumphs, each one a testament to your resilience. Now, drift gently into the soft folds of slumber, where the Arctic's quiet mystery blends with the warmth of your deepest hopes. You're allowed to rest, free from worry, free from the chill, gently carried onward by the promise of a new sunrise in this land of endless wonder.